Okay, now that I've covered some of the big picture economic system notes that I want us to absorb in this class, I want to get into the specific lived experiences of work and workplaces. So the big question we're asking this week is, how do workplaces specifically act as these powerful sites of socialization, these social forces in our lives that hold power and influence how we think about sexuality and gender and how we perform our own sexuality and gender identities. So first, let's define work. So work is really anything that a person undertakes to meet the needs of human survival. This is food, shelter, and recreation. What I really want to emphasize here is that work is about more than monetary reward. And there are types of work that are incredibly important to ensuring human survival that people receive no direct monetary benefit from. But in a capitalist society, in that neoliberal society that I talked about in the last lecture video, for most people, paid work, having an occupation, is a requirement for meeting these basic needs. So let's think about how workplaces function as a site of repressive state apparatuses. So these are the aspects of government and social system that function by violence or through the threat of deprivation to influence what we think of as normal, acceptable, and expect from others as normal and acceptable. Remember, paid work is necessary for most people to avoid deprivation, to be able to pay for food and shelter and recreation. So workplaces function within legal systems inside most modern economic social systems to influence who is allowed to work, what legal protections they have for safety, for how much they can be paid or for how little they can be paid. Legal systems influence how employers are allowed or expected to treat their employees, how much people can expect to earn, what rights workers have to protest unfair treatment. Think about the rights of LGBTQ people to have jobs at all, to not be fired for their identities. Until a Supreme Court ruling this summer, in several states in this country, in the U.S., it was perfectly legal. There were no consequences for depriving people of a job, of the right to earn money because of their sexual or gender identity. That's a very, very recent change to the legal structures around punishment and deprivation in this country. This week you'll also listen to a podcast that discusses things like boycotts and strikes and ways that workers have organized to protest against unfair treatment or unfair wages in the past. I want you to think about, when you're listening to that, I hope you're thinking about RSAs and ISAs as well. Speaking of ISAs, workplaces also function as as sites of ideological state influence, ideological state apparatuses. Every workplace has its own cultural web, expectations for behavior around dress and language and appearance, and site-specific norms based on identity. And they have their own social hierarchy. Who gets to tell people who what to do? Who holds power in different situations? What kinds of relationships are allowed in the workplace and what kinds aren't. And then what kinds of relationships are expected and what kinds aren't in the workplace. And this is incredibly important, particularly as adults, because at a certain point, we spend a third of our adult lives, at least, in workplaces. And they influence how we, the opportunities that we have to perform our identities for a huge amount of our lives. Therefore, things like occupational segregation can become incredibly influential in how we think about gender and sexual identity in work and beyond. So occupational segregation, as you'll listen this week, refers to the predominance of one gender in certain occupations. And this is often caused by people being legally, through RSAs, or socially, through ISAs, excluded from certain occupations because of their gender. Occupational segregation leads to what we're also going to refer to in this class as feminized labor, which is the devaluing of occupations predominantly held by women, which in turn leads to the feminization of poverty, which you're going to read about in Mika Kendall's book chapter this week. Jobs that are predominantly held by women tend to be devalued both socially, not seen as valuable or as important to society, and monetarily, not paid as well as jobs that are coded as more masculine. These jobs tend to be associated with activities that are coded as more feminine. Caregiving, helper roles, support roles, beauty, fashion, and education are all categories of job, categories of work and employment that are feminized and therefore devalued. It's important to note that the majority of adults living in poverty are women, often because their work, their labor is devalued. And this includes work that isn't paid at all. So let's think about the two gendered archetypes of home and family life when it comes to work and economics. There's the breadwinner, the generally male person in a heterosexual household who goes out and does work to earn money, and then the housewife who stays home and doesn't work but doesn't earn any money. They're both contributing to the basic needs of the family and of the community generally, but one of these people, the work that one of these people do is undervalued and unpaid, and that's the work of the role that's generally held by women. It's also important to note that this model of the breadwinner and the housewife was really only ever a possibility or a reality for a subset of white families in the U.S. And white middle-class families in the U.S. Poorer families and non-white families, black families, Latinx families, generally multiple adults in a household had to work because, in addition to their labor being undervalued perhaps for gender reasons, their labor was also undervalued. It was at many points in U.S. history legal to pay non-white people less to do similar or the same kinds of work. So this archetype of the housewife and the breadwinner was really only ever, though it was popular in a lot of media and widely promoted in media, both historically and contemporarily, it was never really a reality for very many Americans. But it's still powerful because of its prominence in media, in the construction of what a normative American family looks like and what work in that family looks like. And because of the way that work and types of work are gendered in our society, caretaking roles that fall to women result in what we're going to refer to as the second shift, which means that women who engage in paid work, particularly married women with children, are also predominantly responsible for the work involved in childcare, cleaning, cooking, and other domestic tasks. So you have one job that you may do outside of the house or with people outside of the house, and then in these cases, women tend to come home and have a second job that they're responsible for doing most of the work to complete and to sustain at home as well. And as you can see, most of the domestic tasks here, laundry, cleaning, washing dishes, grocery shopping, tend to fall predominantly to women alone or to the shared category. There are very few domestic tasks, I think here at the bottom, keeping the car in good condition and yard work fall more exclusively to men. But this is an illustration of how domestic labor is feminized, and these are all tasks for which no one is earning monetary benefit, and in our type of economic system, work that earns money is typically seen as more valuable. To conclude here again with this reference to emotional labor by Gemma Hartley, who's written extensively about this topic. And it's also a type of work that is gendered as female and falls predominantly to women to manage and to keep up with it. I'm going to talk about some of the inequities and inequalities in both workplaces and in these economic systems in the next video.